Captain Marcus Thompson had been sailing commercial vessels for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything the ocean could throw at him. His reputation as a skilled navigator was well known throughout the shipping company, but what really made him popular among his crew was his sense of humor. Marcus had a joke for every situation, whether they were dealing with rough seas, delayed cargo, or difficult passengers. On this particular Tuesday morning in September, Marcus was preparing his container ship for departure from the port of Long Beach. The massive vessel, carrying electronics and automotive parts bound for Singapore, was scheduled to leave at noon. As he walked around the deck, inspecting the cargo containers and checking safety equipment, Marcus noticed his crew seemed unusually tense. The younger sailors kept glancing toward the gangway, whispering among themselves, "What's got everyone so worked up?" Marcus asked his first mate, Rodriguez, who had been with him for 3 years. Rodriguez pointed toward a group of men in crisp white uniforms walking up the gangway. "Company inspection, Captain. They sent some big shots from headquarters to check our operations." Marcus shrugged. He had dealt with corporate inspections before, and they never bothered him much. His ship was always in perfect condition, his crew was well trained, and his safety record was spotless. He figured these executives were probably just pencil pushers, who had never spent a real day at sea. As the inspection team boarded, Marcus noticed they were led by an older gentleman with silver hair and a stern expression. The man wore a uniform that looked expensive, with several medals and insignia that Marcus didn't immediately recognize. Behind him followed 3 younger officers, all carrying clipboards and looking very serious about their work. The inspection began in the engine room, where the visitors examined every piece of equipment with meticulous care. Marcus followed along, answering questions about maintenance schedules and safety protocols. The silver-haired leader asked particularly detailed questions about emergency procedures and navigation systems, showing a level of technical knowledge that impressed Marcus. After 2 hours of thorough inspection, the group made their way to the bridge. This was Marcus's domain, where he felt most comfortable and confident. The bridge was immaculate, with all instruments properly calibrated and charts neatly organized. Marcus began explaining the various navigation systems, pointing out the radar equipment, GPS systems, and communication devices. The silver-haired inspector listened intently, occasionally nodding approval at Marcus's explanations. When they reached the radio communication station, the inspector asked about protocols for contacting other vessels and shore authorities. Marcus demonstrated the equipment with pride, showing how clear and reliable their communications were. As they stood on the bridge wing, looking out at the busy harbor, Marcus felt relaxed and confident. The inspection was going well, and he could tell the visitors were impressed with his ship's condition. The morning sun was bright, and a gentle breeze carried the familiar sounds of port activity, cranes loading containers, tugboats maneuvering ships, and seagulls calling overhead. It was then that Marcus noticed something that struck him as amusing. The silver-haired inspector was standing with perfect posture, hands clasped behind his back, gazing out at the harbor with an expression of deep concentration. His bearing reminded Marcus of those old movies about Navy admirals surveying their fleet. The resemblance was so strong that Marcus couldn't help but chuckle to himself. The inspector turned slightly, noticing Marcus's smile. "Something amusing, Captain?" he asked in a measured tone. Marcus, feeling comfortable after the successful inspection, decided to share his observation. "Well, sir, I was just thinking how you're standing there like some kind of admiral inspecting his fleet. You've got that whole naval commander look down perfectly." The inspector's eyebrows raised slightly, but he didn't respond immediately. The 3 younger officers behind him exchanged glances, and Marcus noticed Rodriguez had suddenly developed a very pale complexion. The harbor sound seemed to fade as an unexpected silence fell over the group. Marcus continued, not noticing the change in atmosphere. "I mean that as a compliment, of course. You really look the part, like you could be commanding a whole navy instead of just checking out our little cargo ship here." The silver-haired gentleman turned to face Marcus fully, and for the first time during the inspection, Marcus noticed something unsettling in his eyes. There was a mixture of amusement and something else that Marcus couldn't quite identify. The man's expression remained neutral, but his posture seemed to straighten even more, if that was possible. "Thank you for the observation, Captain Thompson," the inspector said calmly. "I appreciate your candid assessment." One of the younger officers stepped forward and whispered something urgently in the inspector's ear. Marcus caught fragments of the conversation, something about protocol and proper introduction, but he couldn't make out the complete message. Whatever was being discussed, it seemed to be causing considerable concern among the inspection team. Rodriguez approached Marcus quietly from the side. "Captain," he whispered, "I think we need to talk privately for a moment." But Marcus waved him off. Still focused on the inspector and confident that everything was proceeding normally. "You know," Marcus continued, warming to his theme, "I've always had respect for Navy people. Different world from commercial shipping, of course, but there's something to be said for that military discipline and bearing. You could probably teach some of our company executives a thing or two about leadership." The inspector's lips twitched slightly, whether from amusement or irritation Marcus couldn't tell. "Is that so?" the man replied. "And what makes you think I have any connection to the Navy, Captain?" Marcus laughed, thinking the inspector was playing along with the joke. "Come on, sir, it's obvious. The way you carry yourself, how you examine everything with such attention to detail, the way you ask questions about our procedures. Plus, that uniform of yours looks pretty official, not your typical corporate attire." The three younger officers were now looking distinctly uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and glancing between Marcus and their leader. One of them opened his mouth as if to say something, but the silver-haired inspector held up a subtle hand gesture that silenced him immediately. "I see," the inspector said thoughtfully. "And you find my appearance amusing?" "Not amusing exactly," Marcus clarified, sensing he might have struck the wrong tone. "More like impressive, I suppose. You remind me of those old war movies, you know? The Admiral standing on the bridge of his flagship, surveying the fleet before a big battle. Very commanding presence." Marcus was beginning to realize that his comments weren't being received quite as he had intended. The atmosphere on the bridge had grown increasingly tense, and his crew members were now giving him looks that ranged from worried to horrified. Rodriguez was making subtle cutting gestures across his throat, apparently trying to signal Marcus to stop talking, but Marcus, still not understanding the gravity of his mistake, decided to try to lighten the mood with humor, his usual approach when things got awkward. "Actually, you know what? You should consider a career change. If this whole inspection business doesn't work out, you'd make a great admiral. You've certainly got the look for it." The inspector remained silent for a long moment, studying Marcus with an expression that was becoming increasingly unreadable. The harbor noises continued around them, the distant sound of engines, the clanging of metal, the calls of workers, but on the bridge of Marcus's ship, the silence was becoming deafening. "Captain Thompson," the inspector finally said, his voice carrying a tone that Marcus had never heard before, not angry, but something far more serious. "I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding here." Marcus felt his stomach begin to drop, though he still didn't understand exactly what was happening. "Misunderstanding about what, sir?" One of the younger officers stepped forward again, this time speaking directly to Marcus. "Captain, perhaps we should have made proper introductions when we first came aboard. This is—" The silver-haired inspector raised his hand again, stopping the officer mid-sentence. "No," he said quietly. "Let's see how this plays out naturally. I'm curious to learn more about Captain Thompson's assessment of naval leadership." Marcus was starting to feel like he was walking through a minefield, but he still couldn't see the mines. The tension on the bridge was now so thick he could practically cut it with a knife, and every member of his crew was staring at him with expressions that suggested he had just announced his intention to sail directly into an iceberg. "Well," Marcus said, trying to recover from what he sensed was becoming an awkward situation, "I don't know much about naval leadership, but I imagine it takes a special kind of person to command respect from thousands of sailors. Probably years of training and experience to reach that level." The inspector nodded slowly. "Indeed, many years of training. Decades, in fact. He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. Tell me, Captain Thompson, what do you know about the rank structure in the United States Navy? Marcus felt a strange chill run down his spine. Something about the way the question was asked suggested this wasn't casual conversation anymore. Basic stuff, I suppose? You've got your enlisted men, petty officers, various levels of officers, lieutenants, commanders, captains. He trailed off, suddenly aware that he was venturing into territory he knew very little about. And above captain? The inspector prompted gently. Well, Marcus said slowly, his mouth suddenly feeling dry, I guess you'd have your admirals. Rear admiral, vice admiral. He stopped. The words catching in his throat as a terrible possibility began to form in his mind. Rodriguez had moved closer and was now standing directly behind Marcus, clearly wanting to intervene but not knowing how. The other crew members had begun to edge away from the conversation, as if they could sense disaster approaching and wanted to avoid being caught in the blast radius. The silver-haired inspector watched Marcus's face carefully as understanding began to dawn. You're quite right about the rank structure, Captain. Very accurate, actually. He paused again, and Marcus could swear he saw the hint of a smile playing at the corners of the man's mouth. Though I'm curious about your earlier assessment of my qualifications for naval command. Marcus's heart was now pounding so hard he was certain everyone on the bridge could hear it. Sir, he began carefully, when you came aboard, exactly what did my crew tell you about this inspection? They told us very little, actually. We identified ourselves through your security officer at the gangway, but I don't believe the information was passed along to you personally. The inspector's tone remained conversational, but there was definitely something else underneath it now. Perhaps you could tell me what you understood about our visit? I was told it was a corporate inspection, Marcus admitted, his voice growing smaller. Company headquarters sending some executives to check our operations, I see. The inspector turned back toward the harbor, hands clasped behind his back in that familiar pose that Marcus now realized he had so foolishly commented on. And based on that understanding, you felt comfortable making jokes about my resemblance to a naval officer. It wasn't a question, and Marcus didn't try to answer it. He was beginning to suspect that he had just made one of the most catastrophic mistakes of his career, possibly his life. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity, but he desperately hoped he was wrong about what they were forming. One of the younger officers stepped forward again, and this time the inspector didn't stop him. Captain Thompson, allow me to properly introduce Admiral James Harrison, Deputy Commander of Pacific Fleet Operations, United States Navy. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He felt the blood drain from his face so quickly that he had to grip the bridge railing to keep from swaying. Admiral, not some corporate executive playing dress-up, but an actual, real, four-star Admiral of the United States Navy, and Marcus had just spent the last 10 minutes making jokes about how the man looked like he could play an admiral in a movie. Admiral Harrison turned back to face Marcus, and now the expression on his face was definitely amused, though not necessarily in a way that suggested Marcus was out of trouble. I must say, Captain Thompson, your assessment of my command presence was quite thorough. Very detailed analysis of my bearing and leadership potential. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He tried again, managing only a strangled sound that might have been the beginning of an apology. His entire career flashed before his eyes, and he could already imagine trying to explain to his wife why he was suddenly unemployed and possibly facing some kind of military tribunal. Admiral Harrison, sir, Marcus finally managed to croak out, but his voice failed him again. He had never felt so mortified in his entire life. The jokes about the Admiral's appearance, the suggestions about career changes, the casual comments about military bearing, every word came flooding back with crystal clarity. Each memory more humiliating than the last, Admiral Harrison observed, Marcus's distress with what appeared to be growing amusement. Please, Captain, don't stop now. You were just getting to the interesting part about my potential for naval command. I believe you mentioned something about commanding a fleet? The younger officers were now struggling to maintain their professional composure. Marcus could see them fighting back smiles, and he realized that news of this incident was going to spread throughout both the Navy and commercial shipping circles like wildfire. He would probably never live this down. "Sir," Marcus began again, his voice barely above a whisper, "I had absolutely no idea who you were." "If I had known, I would never have." I would have shown proper respect. I sincerely apologize for my inappropriate comments." "Inappropriate?" Admiral Harrison raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I understand." "You complimented my bearing, suggested I had leadership qualities, and recommended me for naval command. As career advice goes, I've heard much worse." Despite his terror, Marcus detected something in the Admiral's tone that wasn't entirely hostile. There was definitely amusement there, but it didn't seem malicious. Perhaps, and Marcus hardly dared to hope, he wasn't about to be court-martialed or banned from every port in the Pacific. "However," the Admiral continued, and Marcus's brief flicker of hope died, "I'm curious about one thing. You mentioned that I looked like someone from a war movie. Which movie, specifically, were you thinking of?" Marcus stared at the Admiral, wondering if this was some kind of test or trap. "Sir, I'm genuinely curious. Was it the Kane Mutiny? In harm's way? Or perhaps something more recent?" Admiral Harrison's expression was completely serious, as if this were a matter of great importance. I don't really remember, sir. It was just a general impression." Marcus was completely out of his depth now. He had no idea how to navigate this conversation. "Pity," the Admiral said. "I was hoping for Hunt for Red October. I've always thought Sean Connery made an excellent submarine commander." One of the younger officers made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh, quickly converting it into a cough when the Admiral glanced his way. Marcus realized that Admiral Harrison was actually enjoying the situation, though he still wasn't sure whether that was good or bad news for his future employment prospects. Rodriguez finally found the courage to step forward. "Admiral Harrison, sir, Captain Thompson is one of our finest officers. He maintains excellent safety standards and has never had a serious incident in 15 years of command." Admiral Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "I noticed that during our inspection. This is clearly a well-run vessel with a competent crew." He turned back to Marcus. "Which makes your earlier commentary all the more interesting. You clearly have good judgment about ship operations, so I'm inclined to trust your assessment of leadership qualities as well." Marcus wasn't sure if he was being complimented or quietly threatened. "Thank you, sir. I think." "Tell me, Captain Thompson," the Admiral continued, "if you were to meet me again in 6 months, not knowing who I was, what advice would you give me then?" It was such an unexpected question that Marcus answered before thinking. "Honestly, sir, I'd probably tell you the same thing. You do carry yourself like someone born to command. It's obvious even to a civilian." The moment the words left his mouth, Marcus wanted to take them back. Here he was, doubling down on his original mistake, essentially telling a real admiral that he looked like he could play one on television. But Admiral Harrison was nodding, as if Marcus had given exactly the answer he was looking for. "Interesting perspective," the Admiral mused. "You know, Captain, in 32 years of naval service, I've received many performance evaluations. But I believe this is the first time anyone has evaluated my potential for naval leadership based purely on appearance and bearing." Admiral Harrison walked to the other side of the bridge, gazing out at the harbor where several Navy vessels were visible in the distance. Marcus followed his gaze and spotted what appeared to be a destroyer and 2 smaller ships anchored near the naval facility. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, having joked about the Admiral commanding a fleet, while the man's actual fleet was literally visible from where they stood. "Those ships over there," the Admiral said, pointing toward the naval vessels, "are under my operational command, along with about 40 others currently deployed throughout the Pacific." He turned back to Marcus with that same unreadable expression. "So your assessment of my fleet command potential was remarkably accurate." Marcus felt his knees go weak. Not only had he insulted an admiral, but he had done so while the man's actual fleet was in sight. The situation had moved beyond embarrassing into the realm of the surreal. "Sir," Marcus managed, "I feel like I should just stop talking before I make this any worse." Oh. But you haven't made anything worse, Captain Thompson. In fact, you've made my day considerably more interesting." Admiral Harrison seemed genuinely pleased about something, though Marcus couldn't imagine what. "You see, I spend most of my time surrounded by people who know exactly who I am and treat me accordingly. It's been years since anyone has given me such an honest, unfiltered assessment." One of the younger officers stepped forward with a clipboard. "Admiral, sir, we should probably begin the formal portion of our visit. The shipping company executives are waiting in the conference room." For the first time, Marcus looked confused for a different reason. "Shipping company executives? But I thought you were the inspection team from corporate headquarters." Admiral Harrison chuckled, and Marcus realized he had been operating under a complete misunderstanding from the very beginning. "Captain Thompson, we're not here to inspect your ship for the shipping company. We're here because your company has been selected for a new military transport contract. These meetings are to evaluate your vessels and crews for potential military cargo operations." The revelation hit Marcus like a thunderbolt. This wasn't a routine corporate inspection at all. The Navy was considering his company for military contracts, which meant they were evaluating him and his crew for some of the most important and lucrative work in the shipping industry. And he had spent the morning making jokes about the admiral in charge of the decision. "You mean," Marcus said slowly, "you're here to determine if we're qualified to work with the Navy?" "Precisely. Your ship was specifically recommended because of your safety record and operational efficiency. We've been watching your company's performance for several months." Admiral Harrison paused, clearly enjoying Marcus's growing realization of the situation's importance. "Though I must say, your personal evaluation of my leadership qualifications wasn't part of the original assessment criteria." Marcus felt like he was going to be sick. Not only had he potentially ruined his own career, but he might have cost his entire crew the opportunity of a lifetime. Military transport contracts were the gold standard in commercial shipping, steady work, excellent pay, and the kind of reputation boost that could set up a captain and crew for life. "Admiral, I cannot apologize enough," Marcus began, but Admiral Harrison held up his hand. "Captain Thompson, let me ask you something. In your 15 years of command, have you ever encountered a situation that required quick thinking and honest assessment under pressure?" "Yes, sir. Many times." "And in those situations, did you rely on careful diplomatic language, or did you trust your instincts and speak directly?" Marcus thought for a moment. "Usually my instincts, sir. In an emergency, there's no time for politics." "Exactly." Admiral Harrison moved closer, and his expression became more serious. "The kind of work we're considering your company for will require captains who can think independently, assess situations quickly, and communicate directly with military personnel. Diplomatic double talk and corporate speak won't work when you're dealing with urgent military cargo in potentially dangerous situations." Marcus began to see where the admiral was heading, but he hardly dared to hope he was reading the situation correctly. "What I witnessed here today," Admiral Harrison continued, "was a captain who observed his situation, made an honest assessment based on available information, and spoke directly about what he saw. You didn't try to flatter me or tell me what you thought I wanted to hear. You gave me your genuine professional opinion." Marcus stared at the admiral, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Are you saying that my complete lack of protocol was somehow a good thing?" "I'm saying that your reaction told me more about your character and judgment than any formal interview could have." Admiral Harrison's expression was now clearly approving. "When you thought I was a corporate executive, you were professional but relaxed. You showed pride in your ship and crew without arrogance. And when you made your observation about my bearing, it demonstrated that you notice details and aren't afraid to speak up when you see something significant." One of the younger officers smiled openly now. "The Admiral particularly appreciated your suggestion about his career potential, Captain. It's not often someone recommends him for a promotion to his current job." Admiral Harrison laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that transformed his entire demeanor. Captain Thompson, in all my years of service, I have never received such an enthusiastic endorsement of my fitness for command, especially not from someone who had no idea I was already in command. Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense that he had to sit down on a nearby bench. So I haven't completely ruined everything? On the contrary, Admiral Harrison said, you've convinced me that you and your crew are exactly what we're looking for. We need captains who can work with military personnel as equals, not subordinates who are intimidated by rank and protocol. Your ability to see leadership qualities and speak honestly about them suggests you'll work well with our officers. Rodriguez stepped forward, grinning widely. Does this mean we got the contract? Pending the formal evaluation process, yes. Your ship will be our first choice for the new Pacific transport route. Admiral Harrison turned back to Marcus. Though I do have one condition, Captain Thompson. Marcus's heart sank again. Yes, sir? The next time you meet a Navy officer, perhaps you could ask their name and rank before offering career advice. The Admiral's eyes twinkled with amusement. Absolutely, sir. That's definitely going to be my new policy. As the inspection team prepared to leave, Admiral Harrison shook hands with Marcus and his crew. Captain, it's been truly refreshing to meet someone who judges character rather than uniform insignia. I look forward to working with you. After the Navy officers departed, Marcus slumped against the bridge railing, emotionally exhausted. Rodriguez patted him on the shoulder. Captain, in all my years at sea, I've never seen anything like that. You just got us the biggest contract in company history by accidentally insulting an admiral. Not insulting, Marcus corrected weakly. Apparently, I was giving him a performance review. 3 months later, Marcus received a package at his home address. Inside was a photograph of Admiral Harrison standing on the bridge of his flagship, along with a handwritten note, Captain Thompson, thank you for the career advice. As you can see, I took your suggestion and pursued naval command. It's working out quite well. Fair winds and following seas. Admiral J. Harrison, Pacific Fleet. Marcus framed the photograph and hung it in his ship's cabin. Whenever new crew members asked about it, he would tell them the story of the day he accidentally gave career counseling to one of the most powerful naval officers in the Pacific Fleet. The story became legendary throughout the shipping company. And Marcus never lived it down, but he didn't mind. After all, it was the joke that launched his career into military transport and made him one of the most sought-after captains in the Pacific. Sometimes Marcus learned, the best course of action is simply to be honest about what you see, even when you have no idea what you're actually looking at.